learned a lot at your workshops throughout the day.
What you are going to participate in next is a commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the rape of Nanking. This presentation was put together by students from Vantech, along with student representatives from each of the participating schools.
It was 75 years ago this month the Japanese soldiers captured the Chinese city of Nanjing and proceeded to massacre hundreds of thousands of innocent people, men, women, children. The crimes committed were atrocious, girls as young as 12 being raped and beaten, and entire families being slaughtered without remorse or hesitation. What transpired in Nanjing is a shocking example of the horrific capabilities of the human race. The scars, both mental and physical, still affect so many of the victims and their families, and because of this, questions need to be raised. Beyond just asking how and why this happened, we must ask why it took so long for this to even reach our attention. We must ask why it remains an obscure topic and a forgotten Holocaust. We must ask why, despite all the gruesome first-hand accounts, it is still denied by the perpetrators, Japanese ultranationalists, and even some of the Japanese high officials, as the surviving victims live on, often impoverished, with the devastating effects of the massacre still weighing them down.
We are here today to commemorate the incomprehensible number of victims who died or had their lives ravaged 75 years ago. War has always been a breeding ground for such atrocities. We are here to further the work of Iris Chang, who strived to bring these atrocities and the questions they raised to the forefront. We are here to make sure that these atrocities are never forgotten and never happen again. Now, Megan Ennenberg from Vantech would like to use a song to express our strong wish for peace. Would you all please rise up and join us for a moment of silence, commemorating the Nanjing Massacre and all the suffering that took place in the Asia Pacific during World War II. Each representative will sound the bell 3 times to commemorate the 300,000 victims of the Nanjing Massacre. The bell is a mini replica of the original peace bell erected in the Nanjing Massacre Memorial Museum in Nanjing.
No matter how horrible and cruel, history must be told. Denial will not alleviate nor mend the sorrow and the anguish. In the end, I believe the truth will prevail. The truth is indestructible, and the truth recognizes no national boundaries or political allegiances. We, as human beings, have a moral responsibility to seek out the truth, to force countries like Japan to face up to their past, and to try to prevent atrocities like the rape of Nanking from happening again. Iris Chang.
The issues that were discussed today are ones that are critical for us to know about in order to understand our world. I think it is very important to ensure that the horrors that occurred in the past must never be forgotten, so we ensure that history is never repeated.
It's important to pay our respects not only to the victims of the rape of Nanking, but also the victims of World War II in general. Personally, having my own great-grandfather be taken away by the Japanese Imperial Army and have my great-grandmother be tortured, we should commemorate the innocent people who were taken out of the civilian world and put through slaughter. It's important to be thankful for the brave men and women who served their countries and gave the world a wake-up call to not make the same mistake again.
What happened in Nanking should never be forgotten, should never be ignored, just because of the gruesome stories that bring uncomfortable and sad feelings among us. Because to ignore and forget about the ones who were helpless and in pain would be the greatest loss of all. We have to remember also that they're not just numbers, but people.
The rape of Nanking was unbelievably horrific. We recognize the lack of humanity, anguish, and the senseless massacre of this event. An inconceivable amount of people were slaughtered for resisting, trying to run away, or simply because they were just Chinese. 300,000 were killed. Today I strike the peace bell on behalf of my school in commemoration to express in our remembrance of the victims of this massacre and hope that events like these never occur again.
Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. It is difficult for our generation to imagine and understand the horrors that people went through, but it is important to learn of their suffering, so we never allow the past to repeat itself.
Being Jewish and having a personal connection to the term genocide through the Holocaust, it is only with sadness that I remember the 300,000 victims in the rape of Nanking. Genocide is not acceptable. We should all take this moment not only to honor the memory of the victims, but to promise that genocide will never happen again.
It's important to remember these events, not only so that we can learn that to never repeat them, but also for the families and the victims and the survivors in order to heal from these.
75 years ago this month, one of the most barbaric, disgusting, and destructive events in recorded history occurred, the rape of Nanking. Unfortunately, this affair is often overlooked and forgotten and left to sit in the annals of history. This is unacceptable. To prevent this terrible act from ever happening again, we, as a society, must never forget these despicable actions. Together, without finger-pointing, we must forge a path of peace, understanding, and remembrance to ensure that this will never happen again.
I'd just like to thank everyone that organized this event. It's very eye-opening to everyone, the youth especially, and I believe that each and every one of you, please don't forget what you learned today, because that adrenaline that you muster up from this, we can take and translate it into a movement and into a change.
I think I speak on behalf of a lot of us here when I say how much I admire the survivors of these atrocities and how hard it may be to relive these. And I know that what I took away from this event today is that they do it for us. And a quote that I remember from one of the screens is by Iris Chang. It's not until we are fully understanding and educated of the atrocities that history may not repeat itself.
The Japanese massacre of Nanjing from December 1937 to early 1938 lasted for at least 6 weeks. It was a spree of unimaginable crimes against humanity, which demonstrated a level of brutality that remains to this day sickening and disturbing. Such loss, such suffering, cannot be swept under the rug. Denial is not an acceptable option and should not be tolerated. We need to face up to our past as a global community, knowing that even if the wrongs can never be righted, we must make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. We must not forget those who died and those who suffered and suffer still. We must remember and commemorate with heavy hearts and solemn thoughts the rape of Nanjing.
Today, we are here not just to remember the victims of the Nanking Massacre. We are here to remember the 35 million victims of the Asian Holocaust committed by the Japanese invaders. And we are here to mourn in anguish the rape victims of the Japanese soldiers and to remember the victims of Japanese military sexual slavery, the so-called comfort women. And we're here to remember the hundreds of thousands of innocent victims of the biological and chemical warfare conducted by the Unit 731. We are here to remember the many millions of victims of slave labor, including Allied POWs, the Canadian and Hong Kong veterans, civilians, and even children. And we are here as friends to people of Japanese descent to remember victims of A-bombs. They are also direct victims of Japanese militarism. And we are here to remember how peace is the deep desire of all humanity, and that peace comes from justice and reconciliation. My young friends, after attending today's Human Rights Symposium, I do have a few hopes for you. First, I hope with the stories of survivors you have heard today, you will leave this symposium more compassionate and caring about other people's suffering. Second, I hope you to be critical in your thinking and will not be easily influenced by any propaganda or mobilized by the state machinery. I believe most of the Imperial Japanese soldiers were good fathers, good sons, and good brothers at home. But they were mobilized by the state machinery with well-planned propaganda and then went to the battlefield and became killing machines in war of aggression and became perpetrators of crimes against humanity, same as the Nazi soldiers. Third, I hope you will become socially responsible global citizens, because just like one of our student representatives just said, human rights transcends cultural, ethnic, religious, and national boundaries. When one person's human rights is being violated, all people's human rights is violated. Fourth, I hope you to believe that one can make a difference. Look at the examples of the rescuers in Nanking. During the massacre, with the efforts of some 20 Westerners, 200,000 Chinese people were saved. Look at the example of Iris Chang, author of The Rape of Nanking. With her book, she brought this forgotten chapter of history into light again in the Western world almost single-handedly. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you one example what we Canadians have done for these victims. Our House of Commons unanimously passed a resolution in year 2007 urging the Japanese government to publicly apologize and compensate the victim of the Japanese military sexual slavery system. You can see from the slide that many other parliamentaries has also passed a similar resolution in year 2007, when the then Prime Minister of Japan saying that the comfort women were even better paid than their soldiers, which is so ridiculous. And finally, I would like to express my great gratitude to Vancouver School Board for sponsoring this symposium, Vancouver Technical Secondary School for hosting this symposium, and my gratitude also goes to all the speakers and presenters. And of course, without the hard work of Mr. Dale McTally of Vantech and his student helpers, this event would not be possible. So let us give a big round of